In the 70s, Chrysler, with a very empty portfolio, manages to pull off a masterstroke. Their 102 project, a compact modern car designed to take over the entire world. Meanwhile, Peugeot is still wallowing in the old classics with its declining duo 200-4 Renault, on its part, launches the R14, unloved. And Citroën, after nearly facing disaster, gets by with the Visa. But here comes Simca, much more daring, presenting us with the Horizon in 1977. Sold all over, from Europe to Finland and even in the United States under the names Dodge and Plymouth, the Horizon was simply ready to give the competition a good slap. Unfortunately, like a good recipe that goes wrong because of a surprise ingredient, the sale of Chrysler Europe and the Talbot fiasco spelled the end for this brilliant car. The Horizon, though very promising, ended up being abandoned. Today we revisit its past. In 1967, Simca launched the 1100, a car as practical as a well-organized toolbox, as smart as the latest smartphone, and as pretty as a spring morning. A little gem that seemed to have everything going for it, but despite its many qualities, it had to face the reality the competition was starting to heat up. Peugeot was releasing the 204 and 304. Renault was about to deliver its R14, but the real threat was coming from further away. Volkswagen was preparing an ultra-modern and front-wheel drive Golf. In short, the situation was becoming critical, and prompt action was necessary. Thus, in 1974, Chrysler launched the C2 project, with an organization as classic as a family reunion. Simca takes care of the technical design and manufacturing in France and Spain. Roots takes control of the design himself with his style office in England. Meanwhile, Chrysler's top decision-makers were analyzing the market. After rejecting the 106 project, the Simca 1307, 1308, and 1309, they were secretly hoping to find the rare gem, the model that would allow them to kick the Japanese's butts in the brand-new compact car market. All that was left was to hope that the good idea would be there. The 102 project is based on the excellent 1100, a car that at the time was ahead of its contemporaries. So we go back to the basics of a recipe that rocks: 4 independent wheels, front-wheel drive, transverse engine at the front, disc brakes at the front, a volume line, and a hatch. The car is approved for the American market as early as 1974 because, obviously at Chrysler, they didn't just want to win in Europe, but they wanted to conquer the world. And to ensure appeal on the other side of the Atlantic, the project includes extensive research on safety, foreshadowing what the segment will become in the years to come. For Europe, they use the engine, designed in the Simca research offices in France. On the design side, things are moving quickly. By the end of 1974, integration into the American catalog under the Dodge and Plymouth brands is validated. The final design is set in 1975. In November, the first full-scale clay models are unveiled. In February 1976, the shapes of the car are validated. All that remains is to move on to industrialization. The machines for industrialization are therefore ordered while 16 prototypes are on the roads for final tuning in 1976 to validate every detail. In 1977, 385 pre-production and demonstration models are produced. Then comes the climax in October 1977. The Horizon makes its official entry in front of the journalists. Let's discuss its name briefly. In the 50s, Simca named its cars with as much creativity as a poet. Ariane, Aronde, Vedette, Ocean, Planciel, Marley. Then in the 60s, the brand decides to become more serious or lazy by settling for numbers 1100, 1300, 1301, as inspired as a randomly generated Wi-Fi password. The tradition continues from 1970 with more functional names like 160, 180, or the 1307. 1308, 1309 numbers that make you want to use a calculator rather than board the train. And then, miraculously, Simca decides to break out of its arithmetic lethargy and aim for the horizon, literally. A name that sounds like a promise of change and an opening to the world. A name that impresses and works everywhere. Europe, United States, and maybe even Mars if we drive there someday. PSA and taking over Chrysler Europe will not abandon this great momentum, continuing with equally evocative names: Solara, Tagora, Samba. In terms of design, the Horizon was born in England with lines as square as a Tupperware, but devilishly effective. It shares similar proportions with the Renault 14, released a year earlier, except that unlike the latter, the Horizon manages not to look like a squashed pear. These same proportions will indeed inspire a whole bunch of compacts from the 90s like the ZX, 306, and Megane, a real school of style. Production begins in January 1978. On the menu to start, an LS version, equipped with a 1.1-liter engine and 55 horsepower, not a War Lightning, but sufficient for daily use. In July, a more substantial GL comes to reinforce the ranks, and the two models gain 4 horses in the process. Finally, the range-topping GLS arrives with a 1.3-liter engine producing 68 horsepower. The year 1978 ends with a real fireworks display. 207,544 units produced in Europe. A performance that buries Renault, whose disastrous advertising campaign had already dug its grave. And meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the Horizon establishes itself as a true global car. But there's a problem. Chrysler, in the midst of financial turmoil, sees its European subsidiaries as an ink sinking its ship. The decision to get rid of them is made, and PSA plays the night by buying everything in the summer of 1978. The Horizon then becomes the flagship of a PSA group, which on paper becomes the European leader. On paper only because the reality, as often in the automotive industry, turns out to be much more complicated. In the Chrysler universe of the time, the Horizon, well-born and well-received, is an exception. Because while Simca is doing well in France, thanks to a solid range and a high-performing factory in Poissy, the picture is much less shiny elsewhere. Roots, for example, drags a patchwork range composed of Simca, Sunbeam, and Chrysler models. We have the 1100 in Horizon, under the French emblem, the 1307, 1308, 1309, which become Chrysler Alpine, and residual models like the former Hillman, renamed Chrysler Avenger or the Sunbeam. In short, it's a big mess. In Spain, it's hardly better. Simca is the dominant brand, but there are also imported Chrysler and Dodge, all forming a happy marketing mess. In this uncertain galaxy, the future's only real hope lies on the horizon. Other projects are in progress but lack promise. The 109 project will ultimately be reworked by Peugeot to become the Tagora. The 1307, 1308, 1309 will settle for a minimalist restyling or a 3-box version named Solara. And the 102 project will be completely rethought to give birth to the Samba, a city car based on the Peugeot. But let's get back to our Horizon, because at the end of 78, everything seems to smile at the Franco-American compact. For 79, Simca slightly revises its range. The GL version abandons its 1.1 for a 1300 engine, while the GLS welcomes an evolution of the engine, now developing 69 horsepower. For thrill seekers, a performance kit is offered as an option. A dual carburetor replaces the single one, thus boosting the power to 83 horsepower. And if you want it all, the SX is there for you. It includes this kit as standard, in addition to particularly generous equipment for the time. The Horizon continues to charm, even through notable changes. In July 1979, out go the Simca Chrysler logos, making way for Talbot, a new brand that unifies all its entities under the same banner. And this does not hinder its success at all, with 222,000 units produced in 1979, and the title of European Car of the Year, won hands down against the Fiat Ritmo and the Audi 80. The Horizon establishes itself as an essential compact, both for customers and for the automotive industry. This success is not surprising. The Horizon occupies a perfectly calibrated niche in the group's range. Unlike other Simca models, which find themselves in direct competition with Citroën or Peugeot, it ideally complements the offer, positioned between the larger 305 and GSA, and the more compact 104 Berlin and Visa. But alas, this commercial performance will be very ephemeral. From 1980, the Horizon suffers a series of setbacks. First of all, the oil crisis caused by the Iranian Revolution of late 1979 hits Europe hard, significantly reducing the automotive market. Then, the launch of the Talbot brand somewhat blurs the image of the model. But the coup de grace comes from the internal reorganization, the merger of the Simca and Peugeot dealership networks under the Peugeot Talbot sign. This decision causes a real exodus. Many former Simca dealers, frustrated by this forced integration, abandoned ship to join the competition. Worse still, at Peugeot, agents are reluctant to promote Talbot models despite the excellent positioning of the Horizon. Sales suffer, falling to 176,000 copies that year. Finally, a formidable opponent this profile, the Golf, which literally explodes on the market. Available in 3 or 5 door versions, declined in sporty model and carried by an image of quality and reliability, the German compact becomes the preferred choice of many consumers. Some dealers who have moved to Volkswagen even contribute to this success. Faced with this rise in power, the Horizon begins to lose its splendor, marking the start of a more complicated period for Talbot. The early 80s mark a difficult period for the young PSA group, now facing serious financial constraints. The strategic decisions taken at this time will have a direct impact on the future of the Horizon. Despite its initial success, the model undergoes a significant slowdown in its evolution. Apart from a few special series and a minor restyling for the '83 vintage, efforts to renew the range remain limited. The fate of the Horizon is quickly sealed. The 126 project, supposed to give birth to its successor, is abandoned in favor of a new Peugeot model. PSA then focuses its meager resources on 2 key projects: the Citroën BX, launched in 1982, and the Peugeot 205, born in 1983. In this context, the survival of Talbot becomes uncertain. The arrival of new competitors such as the Renault 9 in 1981 and the Renault 11 in 1983 makes the situation even more difficult for the Horizon. Yet PSA tries to limit the damage by introducing some improvements. For the '83 vintage, the model adopts a Peugeot 1.9-liter diesel engine, 65 horsepower, and a premium version equipped with a 1.650 developing 90 horsepower with a standard 5-speed gearbox. Despite these efforts, sales continue to fall. 110,000 units in '83, then 60,000 in '84. The introduction of the Peugeot 309 in 1985 marked the end of the Horizon. Production in France stops in June of the same year, after only 24,000 units. The Villaverde factory in Spain extends production for the local market, but volumes remain low. 5,000 copies in 1986, then 1,000 in 1987. At this stage, the Talbot brand no longer exists. In the end, the Horizon shares a similar fate to that of its contemporary, the Renault 14. A technically successful model, but hindered by unfavorable circumstances. Although quickly abandoned by PSA due to lack of resources, it paved the way for the success of future models of the group. While the 309, ZX, 306, or even XARA owe nothing to it technically, they inherit its marketing positioning, a balance between habitability, performance, competitive price, and pleasant aesthetics. The impact of the Horizon is not limited to Europe. More than 3 million copies have been sold worldwide, including in the notoriously demanding and competitive American market in this segment. A rather honorable record for a car with such a tumultuous history. And you, do you have memories in a Talbot Horizon? Tell me about it in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to find new videos every week.